Hi. So, I just wanted to share some reflections on a particular topic, which I think is on the minds of most of the people I know and interact with. That particular topic is uncertainty. So, I'd like to begin by talking about how. Oh, you may hear foghorns in the background, in case you're wondering what that noise is. How uncertainty um, can be kind of an issue, and maybe how to deal with it in a way which doesn't insult your intelligence or appeal to some kind of blind faith. In my particular case, I'm a very skeptical person by nature, so blind faith really isn't my forte. So I'd like to start by talking about uh, why I find uncertainty to be a particularly bothersome thought process or state of mind for me. I have sort of a very analytical nature. I like to put things in boxes and quantify them and weigh them and measure them. And I like to create all kinds of models for the future and interpretations of the past. And um, in a lot of ways, that's an incredibly useful thing. It's in many situations, not necessarily most, it served me very well. But one of the side effects of that, in my own case, I can tend to take that to a level of extremity, and it sort of manifests as what I might call a bit of a nature of being a control freak. Now, when I hear this term control freak, I generally associate it with someone who is obsessed with controlling other people. That's never really been my goal, thankfully. Um, but how it manifests in my own particular life situation is that for whatever reasons, possibly because of a lack of control in my childhood situation, um, I'm a control freak with my own life situation. Now, again, that can be a very skillful thing. Um, I'm always trying to set up my life situation and control it, the circumstances, for whatever I think uh, is the better. And for me, that means a lot of things. It means following disciplines, it means trying to stabilize and bring clarity to my mind, controlling my diet, controlling how much I interact with my crazy family, um, those sorts of things. So while that can be very skillful, it can also be a really big source of suffering and disillusionment and even depression, because one thing a control freak doesn't like is uncertainty. And I think most likely anyone watching this now in 2020, when we are less than a month away from the American election, which, whether you're on which, regardless of which side you're rooting for, I think in either case, you're worried about the future of the United States. I live in Canada, but the truth about living in Canada is that we generally tend to pay more attention to US politics, for good or ill, because we have a saying here in Canada that America, it's kind of like living next to an 800-pound gorilla. And if you were to be living next to an 800-pound gorilla, you would be quite concerned about what happens to be going on with that 800-pound gorilla. And there is a lot of uncertainty. If you look at any news media outlet, you can more or less find another news media outlet which will tell a completely contradictory story. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that there's a global pandemic going on, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how soon vaccines could be developed, whether they'll be effective, whether herd immunity is the way to go, whether shutting down the entire economy is a good idea, or whether, like I say, just letting herd immunity do its thing is a good idea. And the point of this talk, I'm not talking about any specific thing here, or I'm not trying to convince you of any particular path. You already get enough of that from your friends and family in the news. But I wanted to bring those things up because they're a source of uncertainty. So generally what I see is, and I've experienced in the past, there's two typical ways to deal with uncertainty, and neither of them are things that I've been particularly fond of. So one approach is what I would call the blind faith approach. It'll all work out in the end, is how I would summarize that. And I have family members who take that approach to heart, that there is some force, call it what you will, that is out there that really cares about you. I'm not trying to tear that down if you happen to believe that, but in my own case, I simply can't accept that, with the life I've lived and with the circumstances that are going on. So the blind faith approach of, just have faith that it'll work out, and the great cosmic father or the great cosmic mother or the universe or whatever you want to point to will sort all of our problems out and everything will work out in the end. I think that's, well, I don't see it. So the other common result or approach is depression, disillusionment, wondering, well, if I can't pretend to myself that there is some point to all this, that it will all work out, what the hell do I do? What's the point in carrying on? And I've tended to fall into that trap more so than the blind faith trap. But understand that that is also, in and of itself, a trap. It might not be wrong. But I'd like to suggest that there are more skillful ways of dealing with uncertainty. There are more skillful ways of dealing with conflict. I think, at least in this present moment in time, living in North America, we're lucky that things haven't gotten worse. I'm not going to say they're going well, but at least in my own personal situation, I still have a roof over my head. I have food to eat. I'm not currently at war. And however chaotic the system is, and corrupt, and so forth, and however chaotic or corrupt the leaders of the systems we're in are, my life, for the most part, well, I'll just put it bluntly, it's a lot better than a lot of other places in the world. You know, currently there's a conflict going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan where people are killing each other. I feel lucky to not have to deal with something that severe. The future's uncertain, so who knows what'll happen. Maybe we will eventually end up in such a situation. I don't know, but what I'm pointing to is the apparent here and now, to borrow a phrase from one of my teachers. What's going on in your situation, here and now? What's relevant to you, your situation, your friends, your family, the things that you have control over. So, supposing that we can't appeal to blind faith, and I'm not suggesting you do. If that works for you, keep doing it. But neither am I, you might hear what I'm saying, which I guess I might quite arrogantly call it a realistic view of the situation, which includes both good things and bad things, which is my perspective on reality, that it's never inherently good or inherently evil or inherently neutral. It's all of that. So how do we deal with that in a way that promotes good psychological health? And really, the main thing I'd like to point out to you, there's a couple things. The first and most important thing I suggest is that if you can't find the strength to, I'm not saying you should be positive, but not be depressed. If you can't find the strength to get up and deal with the few things you do have control over, for your own sake, I'd like you to consider the people around you and to realize that that unselfish, good intention to, in whatever way you can, be a positive example and to help other people and to be strong for other people when they can't be, and not to do that in an arrogant way, but in a loving way. I think that's something that myself in particular, I think about a lot. To be a good example. And no, I'm not a good example all the time. I have bad days. It happens less and less that I get depressed and disillusioned because I just no longer really see the point of doing that anymore. But from time to time it happens. Sometimes I check the news and I really don't like what I see. But if you really examine that feeling, the depression, the disillusionment about the future, the worry about uncertainty, the things we can't control, and you've probably noticed there's a lot of things we can't control. That's a mental state. Mental states are temporary. Probably first thing in the morning when you wake up, at least most of the time, especially if you've had a good restful sleep, you aren't immediately concerned about the state of the universe. You might be concerned about going to the bathroom or making a cup of coffee. Once you do, pull up your devices and start to check the news and see how awful the world is, then that can start up again, that disillusionment. And that might be an indication that it's good to take strategic breaks from those things and to be careful not to let those things derail the work that you need to do or the work that you feel like you should be doing. So that's really my primary suggestion for most of you listening to this is, if you can't be, again, I'm not going to say you should be delusionally positive, but if you can't be someone who, the example that comes to my mind is Winston Churchill. A lot of people have a lot of awful things to say about the fellow, and I'm not saying he was perfect. I don't know any perfect human beings, but perhaps you've listened to his famous speech where England, this is circa 1940s, is being regularly bombed by Nazi Germany, and Winston Churchill gives his famous speech, which it's worth a listen to if you've never heard it. I apologize, I forget the exact name of the speech, but there's some famous lines in it. We shall fight them on the streets, we shall fight them on the beaches, and so on. But it's that attitude of not necessarily being delusionally positive, but being fearless, accepting that the world at the moment might be kind of shitty, but we all have our jobs to do and our roles to play. We all can affect it to some small degree for the people immediately around us that we deal with. And you're not going to have a positive effect on the people around you if you're depressed and disillusioned and upset about the way the world is. Now, I'm not denying that. I'm not saying you should repress that. But that's really the only skillful way I see of dealing with this, is to neither be delusional about reality, nor to sink into an emotional state where you aren't capable of even handling the few things you do have control over. I can't really give further advice or instructions there, because what I just told you to do, what I just discussed, deals with this problem of particular psychological states, disillusionment, fear, doubt, restlessness. It deals with those things on a very superficial level. This is kind of what we've generally been taught in Western societies is we rely on counselors and psychologists, and I do appreciate the people that do that, but very often the approach is very much on a superficial verbal sort of level. And to be perfectly honest with you, maybe it's just my character, but that sort of approach, maybe it helped temporarily, and it's better than nothing. And I'm not saying you shouldn't seek help or speak to people who are capable of reframing whatever situation you're in. But my experience has been that it's not going to fix the root problem. I'm not really sure how to proceed here, but I'll have to just try. I'm not trying to convert you. Again, I'm not a religious person. I try to emphasize that. I'm really not, although I'm willing to learn from any philosophy or tradition, anything that gives results. And one of the few things for me that's given results, apart from things like exercise or, those sorts of disciplines, is mental cultivation. We typically call this now mindfulness or meditation practice. That's mindfulness is a word which is very loaded and misunderstood. I myself only started to understand what that concept really points to in an effective way after many years of practicing what I thought was mindfulness. But what it really comes down to is two things. Developing the capacity to be aware of what's going on in your mind. At the moment, I don't feel particularly good. I have a headache, some pressure. The meal I ate earlier today, for whatever reason, didn't really agree with me. This is a common thing. I have a lot of digestive problems because I got fed a really awful diet when I was a child, and that basically nuked my digestive system. So, since I was 11, I've had to deal with digestive problems. And generally they manifest as headaches, brain fog, those sorts of things. Now that I have the capacity, at least part of the time, more and more as I continue to practice, to recognize these sorts of sensations, and to recognize that very often when I feel uncomfortable, which could come from worrying about the future, or it could come from some kind of physical discomfort, physical pain, when I'm able to at least be aware of those things, in effect, the mind models its own sensations and circumstances as opposed to just being carried away with them. It's very difficult to describe these sorts of things because they go well beyond languages. Language is very much a level of abstraction over conscious experience. A useful one, but abstractions are incomplete by nature, by definition. They're less detailed. So that's part one. And part two of what I will call mindfulness is knowing what to do with what's going on with you right now. When I didn't have that awareness or the wisdom faculty, neither of those, when they weren't cultivated, I would feel bad, and generally speaking, I would turn to the wrong things to make myself feel better. Substances, distractions, things which at best were like putting a band-aid over whatever I was feeling, and at worst things which not only didn't make me feel better in the present moment, but actually had the result of making me feel worse or setting me up for failure tomorrow or later in today or a week from now. And unfortunately, my experience has been, and you'll probably notice this yourself if you look closely enough, our autopilot behavior, our sort of our reward circuitry, I believe it's the dopamine system, although it's obviously a mixture of various neurotransmitters. It's a pretty hit or miss system for making yourself feel better. It generally will tend to jump to the most common habit it has. This could be, like I say, substances. It could be If you're a very inquisitive person like me, simply a desire for novelty, for problem solving. So I'm not saying that these different activities should be avoided completely. That might be kind of a bleak existence. But when we have the awareness to recognize what the problem is, and when I say recognize what the problem is, I don't mean the verbal discursive part of your brain talking about what the problem is. Don't trust that thing. It gets hijacked by the desire, the reward circuitry, and then it basically becomes, again to borrow a phrase from one of my teachers, it becomes the inner lawyer that gets recruited to say, you know what'll make me feel better? X or Y. That's not what I mean by awareness. I can't really describe awareness. You just got to practice it and see for yourself. But the wisdom faculty, you can apply that even in absence of awareness on a moment-to-moment basis by having personal standards, by setting what I like to call policy, we call it in computing, and recognizing that there might be more skillful ways to make yourself feel better, which will make you feel better in the present moment, or it might take a while, but eventually. And the good thing is, no matter how bad you feel right now, understand that feeling is temporary. So worst case scenario, you just got to wait it out and try not to cause too much damage so that tomorrow you can get back up. But you need to perform some very strategic analysis about your habits, about your ways of dealing with that feeling of disillusionment and fear and uncertainty. Generally, those should be things which have to do with daily habits. I keep coming back to this point, but what are the few things you can affect in your life? What are some changes you can make? I can't go into specifics here because we all have different life circumstances and we all have different vices, different tools for making ourselves feel better, whether they work or not. But I'm really just advising you to pick a time. If you don't have a lot of mental awareness, you haven't done a lot of mindfulness training, you need to strategically pick times when you feel good and you have a clear head to make those assessments. You need to understand that the quality of assessments and decision-making process of the mind is seen, is influenced, is colored by the quality of mind in the present moment. So if you're in a conscious state of awareness of fear, of anger, of uncertainty, that's going to necessarily affect your decision-making process. To pick a particular example for me, almost invariably, no matter what I do, no matter how much meditation, no matter how much exercise, no matter how much fasting, no matter how much low carb I do, for me, generally speaking, the first 10 minutes of the morning, I get up really early. For me, 5:30 a.m. is sleeping in. I'm usually up at 5 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. For me, the first 10 to 15 minutes of the morning, no matter what I do, almost invariably, I know I can't trust my decision-making process. And so I have to plan those 15 minutes very carefully before I go to bed. What am I going to do? This phone is my alarm, and it sits way across the room. so that when it goes off, I can't just grab this thing, hit the snooze button 15, or well, more like 3 to 5 times, and totally miss my schedule and start the day off on a wrong track. So it's finding that those times when you are in a good, clear state of mind. I would pick a day where you had some good things happen. Maybe you were on track, you were in a flow state, those sorts of things. And then just spend 10 minutes or even an hour or whatever you want to do making those assessments. Okay, when I start to feel bad, when I have this feeling of fear, this feeling of uncertainty, which, to remind you again, they're temporary feelings, they're just states of consciousness. Whether we identify them with them or not, whether we indulge in them or not, whether we do activities which basically support them or we do activities which orient the mind in a more skillful direction, all of those things are temporary, and you can use that to your advantage. So that's all I have to say for tonight. Again, like always, when I make these videos, it's not about me trying to come off as an authority or pretend like I have all my problems figured out or anything like that. When I turn on the news and when I see a lot of articles about people who talk about these sorts of things, I begin to see that only very, very rarely do I hear people advising what I, in my opinion, deem to be things which not only bring positive states of mind into existence, but not in a blissed out, sitting on a bed of flowers, pretending the world isn't, in many ways a messed up place, but being capable of being positive in the midst of the chaos and using that positive emotion as a fuel to get your work done. And in many ways, I'm just trying to remind myself, but I hope these reflections might be useful for you. And I wish you luck.